Well, thank you very much. Delighted to be here. I have to start by saying, keep in mind, I'm not a subject matter expert. I was an attendee at a conference who sent her my notes. But I will tell you this. It was, how many of you have read the book? Seriously?
I've never read the whole thing.
You brought the book with you. Good for you. How many of you own a Kindle or an iPad and you can download the book? That's probably the easiest way. There's also another book out on the market that's similar. I've not read it. I don't know if you have or not. It's Race for Relevance, I think was the other one that she recommended. But it is a fascinating book, and it makes you start thinking about the way that you're structured and the way you're organized. And one of the reasons I said I want to stir the pot a little bit and why I brought up about kind of how we organize ourselves is because if you're not thinking about things that are going to affect the different generations, you need to start thinking about that. And part of where we're going as a culture and that we should be going as individual organizations is looking at new ways of doing things and looking at how we meet the needs of our employees and our volunteers. And I loved hearing as we went around the room this morning, by the way, Farkle. If you want to know what that is, you'll have to ask us afterwards. Do what? Did you play with us? They have spicy Farkle? Did you know that? Missy, did you know that? Well, we'll have to talk, yeah. So now you threw me off base, thinking about the spicy Farkle. So if you haven't read the book, I would recommend that you do go ahead and get this. So what Becky is referring to, and I will be happy to send this to you after today, is Carol Ann and Glenn and I had the opportunity with two of our chamber members to go up to North Carolina. The Hickory Chamber of Commerce was hosting Sarah Sladek, who is the author of the book. And so we had the opportunity back in October to go to her workshop. And it was a 2-day workshop. And the first part of the workshop, she focused on just memberships and associations and what's relevant and not relevant and where are we going. And then the second day that we were there, she did a whole half-day workshop on the generational shift in the workforce. And what's very interesting is in 2015, the Generation Ys will outnumber the baby boomers in the workforce. And it's the biggest shift in today's work environment that we've ever seen in the history of our company. And what that means and what you'll learn a little bit today is our thinking has to shift, the way we structure our programs has to shift, the way we structure our work environment needs to shift, and we just need to be open to a lot of different things in order to become more relevant. So when you look at, well, why did she write this book? And you'll have to bear with me. I'm going to read some of this stuff, and then what I also did, and I would encourage you when you get back to your office or your home offices later, is that you go to her website and maybe sign up to get her newsletters or just do a little time activation in your like Outlook or something to remember to go look at her stuff, because she writes a couple of blogs a month, and she's got some great research that she's done, some reports that you can download. I brought some of them with me for you to look at. One of them is on the crisis in our workforce today. One of them is on advocacy and associations, and all kinds of great white papers that she's written. She's also connected to an organization called Affinis, I believe is what it's called, which is like a graduate student type organization that does research and has just tons of tools as well. But one of the things that I did enjoy hearing, that's where I was going, Crystal, before I got sidetracked, is I liked hearing how many of you are doing face-to-face interpersonal kinds of strategies in the day-to-day, that you're scheduling who you're going to go visit, who you're going to go see. I forget who was it said, not so much, I'm just going to talk to you at the time of the year when it's renewal time, but I want to hear you and see you and talk to you throughout the year. If you're not doing those kind of strategies, I know it's kind of a shift in how you structure your workload. I would encourage you to do that, because it really is about getting back to face-to-face and kind of pushing the envelope a little bit with that, because the technology component is so big and people are relying on that. But one of the things that Sarah shared was that this shift in memberships has been coming about for about 12 years now. How many of y'all were born between the years of 1946 and 1964? Stand up if you were born between 1946 and 1964. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I think there's 28 or 9 in the room today, right? So not quite half, but these would be your baby boomers. Look at you. So if you were born from 1965 to about 1981, 1983, stand up. So, okay, these are your Gen X's. I would be in that group as well. We're kind of like the forgotten generation. We're squeezed between those two really important groups. So if you were born after 1981, which I'll have to double check and see. If you were born after, is it 81? Because you're after, okay. So if you were born after 1981, stand up. Okay, how many of y'all brought your iPads with you? Your iPhones? Really? Okay. No, only if you're in that group. I admire you, though. So these are your Gen Ys. And you notice that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did I count right? Yeah. Okay. So I want you, as we're talking about the various groups, to pinpoint and look around the room and eyeball the folks in the different generational groups so you can better y'all can sit down. You can better understand. Do you mind? Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. Yeah. So if you'll go to the next slide, please, Carol Ann. Okay, you might be wondering, okay, so why are all these changes happening and what's going on in the world? And the three main reasons are the declining economy, the rapidly changing technology, and then all the shifts that we're seeing in our demographics. With the declining economy, you're seeing a lot. How many of you are seeing people who are saying, I demand a return on my investment? Okay, how many of you are seeing people who want instant gratification? That's a big trend with the Gen Ys, big time instant gratification. One of the trends that you'll see, and I forget what it was called, it was, she showed a picture of the Beatles when they first came out. You remember they had their little black suits with the white shirts and the black tie, and then a few years later they were dressed in psychedelic colors and the funky looking glasses and things that don't match. So it was a shift from what was the conformity, what was the word? I'll have to look what it is. Do you remember what the word was? From conformity to individuality, and that's kind of what defines the Gen X's today. But we have more technology that's been developed in the past 5 years than in the past 50 years. So that's something that is, I know it's hard for all of us as chambers to integrate a lot of this technology because we've not had to do it in the past, and we're trying to almost play catch up. And then there's so much technology that you have to maneuver and manipulate and manage at the same time that it can be overwhelming. But that's not going away. It's a big piece. In fact, when they surveyed the Gen Ys, what's most important, technology and air were rated equally as important. So that's huge to understand that. I know you're like, really? Seriously? Technology and air. Baby boomers were supportive and service-oriented. This is part of your demographic shifts. They have always been, obviously, the vast majority of the workforce, but as I said, in the year 2015, Gen Y will absolutely outnumber baby boomers starting that point forward. In 2011, baby boomers started retiring on the average of 10,000 per day. And that's going to go on for the next 15 years. So, I mean, you all, this is not news to any of you. You've read it, you've heard it, you know about all the trends, the aging population and what's going to happen. But when you think of the reference knowledge and the skill set and just all of the just knowledge that the baby boomers represent, and that's going away. And what you also have is now, because of the economy and some things that have happened, a lot of your baby boomers are working longer than they had anticipated. And what that's doing to a lot of Gen Xers is it's making them wait longer for their promotions or for the jobs that they've been waiting. So part of what's being predicted is that the Gen Ys might jump over the Gen Xers and take some of those jobs maybe that they've been waiting on. So part of this, you've just got to be aware of what's going on with your members, because it's going to affect volunteerism and leadership, but also be aware of some of this that's going on in your own organization as well. So if you really think about this, then in the year 2015, Gen Y will outnumber baby boomers. This means that the majority of the workforce will be in their 20s. That's huge when you think about levels of expertise and experience and knowledge and the way that they think and how they approach work. And if you don't have the type of environment that's going to attract that age group or that type of worker, what can you do to create or structure an environment that entices them? And we're going to talk a little bit about that more in a little bit. But again, this is the largest turnover in human capital in the history of our country. So if you're not connected and you're not learning about this and you're not applying it to your own environment, I would encourage you to use today as kind of your stepping off point in order to do that. Okay. Okay, now there's a lot of stuff I'm going to share just on this one slide. One of the things she talked a lot about was that you have to decide what are you best at, what's your niche. If you had to remove everything that you do and just clean the slate, we're not going to do anything else, and just choose one thing, what would that be? So let's go. I want to do a little interactive stuff. Let's go around the table, and we'll start with you, Mary. If you had to take everything off the slate and just choose one thing that you were going to do as an organization, what would it be? The one thing that you were best at.
I wish you hadn't asked me first.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Gina.
Probably leadership now.
So the leadership program is what you would tout as the best thing that you guys do. Okay. Statesboro, what would it be for you guys?
You're saying what we do or what we want to do? I mean, I think.
Well, you could make it what you want to do.
Get out there and really go talk to all the members, so everybody knows me personally.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Okay, so the one thing that you would do
Out of the
best,
office
you would,
and go, I'm good with people.
okay,
talk to them.
so you would interact with your members. Okay, okay. You clean the slate. Back to Statesboro. So I gave you a moment to think about it.
For my part of
Uh-huh.
it, if we were cleaning the slate, what we do best on what I do every day is the events and the fundraising.
Okay,
That's what I do best.
okay.
Roxanne does everything else.
So as an organization, you could only provide one benefit and service to your members. So you would provide,
The best thing
One
that
event.
I can say that we've started doing is the face-to-face and going out. We try to do that every quarter now.
okay,
Not ask for money, not ask for invoices, not do anything, but as an organization, we go out and do what we call the program, thank you, but we try to do it every quarter now.
Okay.
We're not asking for anything in return, it's face-to-face, and our whole board does it.
okay, so that's,
Thank them and trying to update their information.
Okay, okay.
Employee change.
so let me ask you this question. That's something you are doing as an outreach for them. What is it giving them in return that makes them want to stay a member of your organization?
Personal touch.
Okay,
We've had an amazing response as far as they're glad that we've actually taken the time to go out and do this to them personally.
Okay.
Like you were saying, the face-to-face is what everybody's wanting, that
Right.
attention. Because we're not asking for money, we're not asking for anything. It's just that we're taking the time to say thank you for being a member. We go over their benefits, we try to update, their website, their member form.
so would you consider that a benefit of membership, the
Definitely.
face-to-face? Okay, okay.
They do, especially.
Okay, and I would imagine it's affecting your retention rate significantly.
It has been
Yes.
huge, because we started doing this on a regular basis last year. Maybe 2010. Doing it on, we used to do it once a year.
We're doing it way more, we're
Yeah.
doing it
Okay.
consistently more now than.
Okay,
It used to be once a year, now we're trying to do it every quarter.
very consistent. So anybody else, if you had to clean the slate, you couldn't do anything but one thing that you provide for your members. Yes, Henry County.
Networking events.
Really? Okay. You know why I said it that way? Because a little bit later you're going to learn that she says if you answer networking, that that's absolutely not the answer, that we've got to, we all think of networking first because we're trained to do that because that's what we do, but that is not necessarily something that these new generations are looking for. But I'm glad you said that. I was wanting someone to say that one.
We've started a new.
Yes, uh-huh.
We call it 3 months.
3 months?
The whole staff's doing it. At 6 months, we're going out for knock on the door, walk on. That's we're using their join dates as our target.
Okay.
And then at 9 months, we're inviting them in for coffee and breakfast.
Okay, okay.
It's working great.
And you call it your 3-month campaign?
It's
No.
retention, yeah.
Okay, because it's kind of a clever little,
Three components to
it's like 3, 6, 9, right? Who do you,
That way we're not asking for money.
okay,
We'll see them 3 times
Okay, very good. Dublin.
As far as the networking events, like I notice, it doesn't take long to look around, like at a business after hours or the annual meeting when they're, for example, 2 nights ago, Tuesday night, business after hours, about 150 people. I found maybe 7 or 8 my age in there. The rest of them are all either elderly or very.
And how do you define how do you define elderly? Like what? Okay, okay.
And I'm looking around, and I do have young members
Yeah.
in the chamber, and they don't come.
Yeah,
They want to know, how am I going to market their business for them?
right.
They're paying me. It's almost like they view it as a service. What are you going to do? It's
Yeah.
like membership into a club, like the older crowd.
Right, yeah, which is part of the generational differences. You know, I was going to share with you, when we do our membership surveys, we're consistently, about 98% still wants networking. Yeah,
When we do the survey and ask, why do they join the chamber, that's overwhelmingly
yeah,
large response.
yes.
I have kind of a spin on the networking. We want to do more service leadership events. So we're looking at a lot of the nonprofit members that we have and getting the other for-profit members to do book drives, canned food drives, and have our members host those events where we're actually doing.
And are you a Gen Y?
I'm a Gen
X? Okay, what year were you born?
1977.
77, okay. The reason I ask is because the service-oriented projects are a big deal with the Gen Ys, and to a certain degree with the Gen Xers, but more so with the Gen Ys. So I would say that what you're doing right there is a very strategically aligned strategy for the Gen Y. Yeah, oh, Crystal, yeah.
Networking, as we know it, to me, I think is changing of what the expectations are. Overwhelmingly, people want to network, but what I'm finding that we do best, that if we could clean the slate, is consulting. It's that connectivity between people who can't make that connection and they don't know where to go. We have a lot of people who are coming in and they want to do things, but they don't know how to do it or how to go about it because every community and every place is a little different. So the networking is important. We need to pull everyone together. But if you don't have that connectivity, then it's just a room full of people.
So it's taking that networking to another level and giving it a little more structure.
They want one-on-one time.
Mhm.
If we had time for people to call and say, can I meet with you? Can I meet with you? Can I meet with you? And if we literally had the time to really allow people to sit down and have that one-on-one. So it is the FaceTime, but not going out and saying, hi, we appreciate you. But the reverse of letting them know what our expertise is to allow them to contact us when they're in need of connectivity because they're having problems with the city or with the county or with whatever concerns they have, that they know that we're the first place to call and we take that time.
Well, and you've hit on something very important. You want to say something real quick? Okay. Which we're going to see in a couple of slides, which the first portion of this, before we get into the generational information, it really kind of boils down to understand what their needs and problems are and then find them a solution. And I think with what you guys are doing and what y'all are going at, what you've described, it's almost flipping it a little bit, getting to the strategically asked questions. Where are they hurting? What are their needs? Where do they need some assistance? And then maybe the next, it's where you're going, but where we haven't as organizations in the past is to the solution side of it. Now that I understand you, I'm going to help you fix your problem. Yes, Glenn, you had something you wanted to say.
In my advanced years, I can't remember back when I was a young but it would be interesting to go back.
He's older than he looks, too, just so y'all know that. He's 72. You'd never know that.
71. It would be interesting to go back and look at us when we were their age. Because I'll bet we weren't interested in networking either. And the difference now is that unlike when we were young, there were a lot of baby boomers, more advanced baby boomers, who were mixed in. And so therefore it didn't matter. We were going to be exposed to it. Eventually we would learn it. Eventually we would move into it. Whereas now these folks are going to be tossed in and we're leaving. And so there's not that natural progression that they go through as they mature in the business world where they recognize that, oh, I actually am networking. I didn't realize I was. Now it's, hey, you're going to be networking, and I don't even know what that is. I'm not going to do it. networking to me is a computer, and I'm on my way. So I think that
Yeah.
I think that part of this is, when we go through this, you'll find it's extremely interesting, but I also think that the sounding of the alarm that networking is dead is an overreaction. If the chamber gives up networking, like they've given up all those other things they've given up over the past couple of decades, they're going to find that they've got no place to go. And so I don't overreact to the fact that they don't want networking.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with you. You will hear that said and read that in the book, but just like your survey and our survey and the rest of you probably shows, it's helping members to redefine what does networking mean, and that there's more to it than just going into a room and meet. It's a strategic side of all of this. One of the things that I had written down when you really listen to all of this, it's us becoming better at data mining. You've heard that phrase before, right? I had written down a note. Chuck is relatively new in his role in overseeing the retention program. But he's really good with data, and he's really good with wanting to understand the numbers and all that kind of stuff, and that we should look at, as we do our membership surveys, because you can always tell who's the name behind the information, is almost creating spreadsheets for each member based on what their needs are and based on what the solution is. And the more you can be very strategic and very thoughtful in your process, it's a process in how you do all of this, and then be able to sort that data, because you've heard this probably in sessions for at least a couple of years, that you want to be able to target your communications to the policy wonk people, or to the people who want the access to information, or people who are looking for, tools to grow their business. Well, the only way to do that is to start with the one by one approach, asking your strategic questions to know what they, which category do they fit, and then from that point, then creating programs or messages that you specifically send just to those groups of people, as opposed to the mass marketing. And it's so easy to do the mass marketing because it takes so much time on the back end to do your data mining and to, start dividing people by categories, but that's really where we need to be going to better understand our members. Don't let me forget this, but I want to share in a little bit, and you'll remind me, about our conversation and shifting who our target member is. So I'm going to let you talk about that in a little bit. But back to this slide right here. Again, the most important thing is to understand who you are, understand the number one thing that you can do, or maybe number 1, 2, and 3 things that you can do, and then from that determine what that looks like. How are you going to create the value? And one of the things she talked about, which niche in her interpretation meant creating value. So niche equals creating value, and the value comes from your members. So you have to ask yourselves the question, how are we helping them grow their business? What do people pay you for? And do we really know what that is? They might say, like in our case, 98% say networking. But what are they really saying? What Crystal has said, which is connecting people to resources and other people and opportunity. And do we really understand that? Have we drilled down the questions with them? And, I'd love, Betty, when you go out, I know you're visiting every single one of your 1,500 members. We'd maybe in a little bit, if you could share with us, what are the questions that you're asking them? Are you drilling down to understand maybe what's behind that first question or response of, well, I want the networking, or I want access. Is it access to people? Is it access to information? Is it access to opportunity? I mean, are we drilling down to get that kind of information? One of the things that she stressed was to stop trying to do everything and doing things because we've always done it that way. How many times have we heard that, right? And I don't know how many of you have pushed back on your organizations over the last couple of years. Anybody here, have y'all gotten rid of some of your sacred cows? Yeah, you're all shaking your heads. You have? We went through this back in 2004 in our organization, where we literally got rid of 5 main events that we'd done for years. One event we'd done for 30 years, another one we'd done for, since we'd been in existence, which was 1947. But we used our mission as the litmus test. If it doesn't fit the mission, then we're not going to do it. So we gifted our road race to the adult literacy program. We gifted, that was to Main Street, and we gifted the bike ride to the adult literacy, we gifted the STAR student. How many of y'all do STAR student programs? Well, we gifted ours to the Rotary Club. We gifted our Citizen of the Year. Anybody do Citizen of the Year? I know Cherokee does. I guess you're still doing it, right? Yeah, we gifted our Citizen of the Year to the Kiwanis Club. And public safety, anybody do public safety stuff? We gifted our public safety to public safety. and what we gifted was the language we came up with, because it's like they're great programs, but they're not necessarily 100% aligned with our core mission. And when you look at the sweat equity involved in doing some of those events, is the juice really worth the squeeze? I've just given you my two favorite sayings, sweat equity and is the juice really worth the squeeze? And you kind of have to ask yourself those questions. You got to decide what's the number one thing you can be the very best at. What can they get from you that they cannot get from somebody else? And if you don't have anything, then maybe it's time to really think through that. And what are some things that you're doing that they can get elsewhere, maybe, and that you shouldn't be doing? Those are the kinds of questions that you need to ask yourself as well. This next piece on understanding your culture, this is huge, because culture defines everything about who you are. And I'm going to pass these around in a little bit. But this is one of the white papers that Sarah had on her website that she wrote specifically on culture. And she said, culture is not something you can actually see, yet it permeates the environment and experiences your association creates for its members. It's the values, beliefs, assumptions, experiences, and habits that create your association's behavior and ways of working together. So I'm going to use us as an example going back 10 years. When I first came to the Newton-Coweta Chamber, I had more people that said, well, others look at us as very unfriendly and we're very cliquish. How many of you have ever heard your groups called cliquish, right? Part of it's human nature. You're always going to have a little bit of that. But we had our after hours, we were only getting 15, 20 people. Anybody have that? Have you ever experienced that? You're just not coming. And it was because we were unfriendly, we weren't nice, we weren't welcoming. So we went through a couple of years where we redefined our culture. And I think for the most part, we're fun. More than anything, we've interjected fun into the culture. But we do have people who are members of other chambers in our area that will tell us, by bar none, we're the most valuable chamber because we're so welcoming and friendly, but you have to work at it. I had a couple of years ago a situation with a staff member and a couple of volunteers that they were really just creating a negative clique. And I had to become the click buster. And I loved it because it was like, you know what, we're going to focus back on why people come to our events, and it's all about them, and it's not about you, and it's not the party that you bring to the after hours, it's the experience that you create. So we talk about experience a lot. It's something that if you take your eye off the ball, though, you can quickly go in reverse. And a couple of things that she shared, I don't know if I have it here, about the culture. Well, here's one culture that she gave the example. Minneapolis, everybody's heard of Minneapolis, right? And within 3 years, the Minneapolis Chamber had 3 different presidents, 19 staff turnover, a board of 50 people who were unengaged, and they lost over $1 million, and they didn't know where it went. So that was an example. This is not a great culture. It's toxic. How many of you ever had infighting in your organization, or financial difficulties that create negativity, I guess? Anybody want to share an example? I'll tell you what we did initially to get over our culture was we started a program called Mystery in the Boardroom. And it was our new business after hours. It was rather expensive. It only lasted for about a year because you had to have a pretty significant sponsor for each one. But we hired a mystery writer to come in and write the whodunit kind of stuff. You ever gone to the dinner theater and you have to walk around and figure out whodunit? So we did the little whodunits, and there was an actual, when you showed up and you got a folder, and it was forced networking. It made you talk to people because you had to get the clues and you had to figure it out. And the first one we did was at a housing development where we went into 3 different homes and you had to look for the clues, and you had to talk to people. And this went on for about a year, and that is what increased our attendance, but it also made us open up and become more friendly because you were doing these forced networking activities. And from that, we were just able to leverage it and do some other things. Anybody want to talk about, you've seen some things in your culture, or you focus on the experience or the feedback you get? Any examples? Yes.
When I first came on the job, it was your politician, legislator, whatever, Haynes, Scott, whatever, it was boring. People were bored by it. We now do a murder mystery as our, and we're getting our
Cool. Okay.
Members get up there and do all the acting. So it's a lot of fun. It's casual as a catfish fry. I mean, you can wear jeans if you want to. We just try to make it a lot more casual. We have members who are members of other chambers or in our communities, and they say every year we want to come to yours. We'll have Joseph from Georgia Power. He comes over from Albany to Dawson.
Okay.
He says, y'all's is a lot of fun.
So you're doing the revealing of the stuff you would typically do at an annual meeting, and this changing of the gavel and all that, but it's a part of the mystery that has to be solved.
After you eat supper, we do the business part. It's very quick. It's, we do it in probably 10 or 15 minutes. And then we do the actual play.
Okay.
Yes, it's social later.
Very cool. How many of you have had training for your ambassadors on how to be gracious and generous and kind and hospitable? You want to tell us about that?
I actually took them to Rock Eagle, the 4-H place in Putnam County, and we did a ropes course as a kind of a team building exercise, and then we brought them back and had a breakout session for the newer ones. They had just joined the team, there's about 10 of them, and then the seasoned, which is about 11. So just kind of pulling their strengths, but making sure that they understood the importance of their role. I've got a really good, they're my A team. I've just got a really good ambassador group.
And so what are their behaviors? Have you talked about behaviors at events, like what's acceptable and not acceptable, or what you're looking for?
When I started, August of last year, I heard the word clicky about 50 billion times. And my goal was to eliminate that. So that was a big tracing point for the A team, was to make sure that their role at networking events and any event was to make sure that they pulled new people in and they generated conversations that were necessary to make people feel comfortable and break up the monotony.
So what was a cliquish behavior? Was it huddled all together in the corner, or? Okay.
The same people, the same events, in the same corner, talking about the same stuff, and it just, that's what makes things get old.
And have you noticed a difference?
Absolutely.
Okay, and what difference have you noticed?
There's new people coming to the events, new sponsorships are being driven, so, we see the ball rolling.
Okay, okay. That's a great example. Does anybody else have a similar story? Yes.
Well, we usually have about 250 to 350 people to come to our business after hours, and we do one every month. But when you first see them, they're all together. There's 15 over here together. There's 10 out on the court. So they really are. So new people that come in, lots of times, they kind of feel like the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've worked on doing things like that. This summer, though, we did 2 business after hours at the chamber. And what we did was we rented out every room in the chamber to a different vendor. And we gave them a card as they signed in that night that made them go to every one of them and get their card punched, so that they could be in a drawing for a Kindle or something, something big. And we saw that help break the ice a lot and kind of help break up those groups. And then at the
That's a
next
great
business
idea.
after hours, you saw a lot more mingling. So I think, things like that sometimes just, and I wish we could all come up with a different word besides networking.
Yeah.
I think networking is just a word that people, they really don't understand it. And when you try to tell them, listen, you're not going to get business. I can't guarantee you that tonight you're going to get business by coming to a business after hours. What you're doing is building a relationship. You may need insurance tomorrow. You may need somebody, a real estate agent. So, you have to start planting that seed. And he was saying a while ago about not seeing many younger ones. We're seeing a lot. We're seeing a lot of our younger people coming in now.
And what are you doing to make it a more friendly environment for them?
Well, there's always booze.
That transcends everything.
But I think, trying to get some of our older members more involved in taking them under their wing and kind of
Okay.
helping them a little bit too.
Okay.
I think that, it's just become a better environment for us.
Candace?
Yes.
With our business after hours, we do one once a month as well, and we average 150 to 200 people, but we had so many wanting to host, and of course, that's booked for the next 20,000 years. We started doing a business for 4 hours every month as well,
So how does that work?
and it's already booked for the next 2 years.
Really?
So, but what we've seen with that group is we do it once a month as well, but it's
7:30 to 8:30 usually runs into 9 o'clock,
Mhm.
but we see a completely different group of people. These are the people that obviously, and what we were trying to attract, these are the people who can't get there at 5 o'clock.
Right.
Or, they're more of your doctor's attorneys who are still in
Mhm.
the office or can't get away, or retail side of it, which we try to pull in more, which is sometimes hard to get. But you see some of the same people.
Yeah.
That
And do you do that one once a month as well?
Yes.
And do you rotate your locations?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Whatever business wants to host it.
Okay,
Then we make
okay.
sure that we rotate it, but we've seen, and it's about half the size, which is what we were expecting,
Mhm.
because we wanted to allow those smaller businesses who didn't have the parking or the accommodations.
Right.
We wanted them to be able to be a part of that as well. But what we've seen since we started this, going into this will be the second full year, in 13, but the same people who did them saw it beneficial and they're wanting to rebook it again.
That's a great idea.
But,
Fantastic
we have
idea.
networking people, so the networking obviously is still important to those
Mhm.
people, but what we got out of it is it's a totally different group. Because our business after hours is the cocktail hour, is the more
Mhm.
social hour. We only have a few that do the alcohol, and of course, but some of those people see that as a turnoff, so this was a way for those people, not only people who can't make it at 5 o'clock,
Right.
but for those who just don't want to be a part of that more social
Right.
part, they come to that event and see that it's beneficial, so that was a way we could give something to those people who saw the business after as a turnoff.
So that's a great example of you basing it on needs.
Yep,
Mhm.
and we wanted to-
Somebody had their hand, yes.
I was going to address Miss Betty's comment about networking. When I worked at MDA, we adopted a term called net weaving. And
Yes.
it's networking plus the connectivity end of things. And people like, I guess, the feel of the word, to know that they're being woven, into
Yeah, there's several books out on net weaving if you've not read about, or just Google it, yes.
The guy's name is Bob Littell.
Yeah.
Littell. And he actually is on the board of the Pay It Forward Foundation as a result of the net weaving process and concept.
I want to read this to you. One of the things that it talked about the recession coupled with the extraordinary technological boom is what's forced members to start asking the question of what's the value of your organization. And it says the younger generations are driven by personal happiness and are heavily influenced by the organization's culture. And what that means is if they don't like your culture, and you may not even know that they don't like it, they leave, but that's the reason why they might be leaving. And it said that culture is powerful now more than ever, and culture in and of itself alone has the muscle to make or break your organization. Yes.
I just wanted to share something we have been successful at. We are our ambassadors are called chamber partners. And we have been developing, since I came onto the chamber, developing that group, because I used to be a chamber partner for like 4 years, and I said, okay, there's so many things we could really do. And we now have incorporated, we have baby boomers, Gen X and Gen Y, and we have so much fun. And I have to say that a lot of the fun factor I stole from the Coweta Chamber, because they always have fun. I mean, that you have that energy. So that group, and there's 15 of them. So whenever they're at any of our events, any activity, they bring that whole fun, energetic, interactive across different generations. But what has happened is now some of them are becoming part of our board of directors because people are seeing them, and these are people who are executives. So a lot of times your chamber partners may not always be the decision makers, but somehow we found that balance, and now we are going to, with the installation of our new board of directors, have 5 of our chamber partners who are actually helping, doing registration, greeting people, networking. They're going to be on our board of directors. So I anticipate a whole new perspective for our board.
You know what the great part is about that? How many accountants do you typically have on your board, or people who have a financial background? Y'all ever done a survey of that?
We have a good balance.
Pretty darn overwhelming, because when you look at your corporate folks, like from larger industries, how many of them do you ask what their background is prior to their current position? Pretty overwhelmingly, you're going to hear the financial. Do y'all hear that? Accounting? So what you've described is it's harder for chamber boards to get people who are connected to the membership and to the people side of it. So you're able, that's going to affect everything you guys do in your planning over the next few years.
So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. Kudos to you guys. Yeah. Any other examples? We're going to move beyond culture, but I wanted to throw out just a couple of red flags. If you are seeing high turnover among staff or volunteers or the board, if you're having difficulty recruiting or retaining members, or you're hearing negative feedback from your members or others in the community, I don't know how many of you see a lot of emotional outbursts taking place, arguments, storming out of meetings, or you have a lot of no-shows, like board members not showing up for meetings or people making reservations and not showing up. Those are red flags that you probably should have the culture conversation with staff maybe initially, and then maybe do some focus groups with members and non-members. How many of you do focus groups with non-members? That's probably one of the greatest groups of people that you can access their minds and get feedback for you as an organization. Doesn't matter if they ever decide to join or not, but they have a different perspective. They're not in that in crowd. They haven't drunk the juice, whatever. They can give you some great insight. I would highly encourage you to do focus groups with non-members.
You know, something we do, we have Chamber Master, and I see a generation gap is sending the stats out.
Mm-hmm.
Your younger member call, you know, they want to know all the details. The others just ignore the email when I send it out.
Your Gen Y, I mean your baby boomers. And why is that?
My age.
Yeah,
I
you're right.
guess they're just not that technology driven. That
Okay.
we have the capabilities of knowing how many people went to their site, how many people has went on to their that's been connected.
Yeah.
We see how many times they've been to.
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
And they're like, you know, they're all about it.
So you're tracking that, which is fantastic.
Well, you got it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If I'm bored for a little while, I'll just send some out.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just sit and do it for hours.
So I want to give you something to go read, and it's on Sarah Sladek's website. But she has a recent post called Creating Positive Culture for Your Association. So I would encourage you to go look at that and see what kind of ideas she might have that could help you. I think we're ready to go to the next slide. There was one idea that she shared about having an event and call it a net giving event. Have y'all ever heard of these, net giving? The way she described it was, instead of networking and exchanging business cards, you have your member come with their needs, such as a bookkeeper or a physician or a heating and air service that they're looking for. I'm looking to sell my truck, something like that. And you have people step up to the plate in that meeting that says, I can help you with this need, or I can help you with that need. It's a little bit of, it's kind of a B&I sort of thing, referral on steroids combined with the networking. But you might consider that a little net giving event. And maybe it's you start with a target audience and you find out what their needs are in advance, and then you try to have people who can meet those needs there at the same time. So again, you're creating those connections. The other thing she did say with culture is stop looking at the past and being focused on history and focus on the here and the now. And one of the suggestions she had, and I don't know how many of you might do this, says have your members write your marketing content. Do any of you have your members actually help write some of your collateral or your messages or your key talking points that you're going to be using? Mission speak or corporate speak needs to go away, and part of that's industry speak as well. But that having your members come in and maybe write some of your collateral for you or your language is another way to stay connected to what's going on. One strategy she suggested was if you have like a newsletter or a magazine and you have guest writers, maybe get the members to write the guest editorials and then choose the articles and the photos that go in each issue. So maybe you have a group of members who look at the January issue or the February issue, and they decide what's the theme going to be, what are the articles going to be, what's the content, where are we going with that. Takes a little extra work, obviously, but if you can make it happen, it's one way of infusing your membership's voice in everything that you do. Okay, so this next slide, how can we build the must-have organization of the next century? It's all about value, and we've talked about that a lot over the last couple of years. How many of you have membership benefits that are exclusive, that they cannot get from somewhere else? They have to get them through you. Anything? Do we have anything like that? See, that's a hard question to answer. And how do you do that? Anything
The
that,
only benefit you could say is that they have access to, each other through our connection.
right.
That's really stretching.
Yeah,
That's really
yeah.
going deep.
Anybody want to take a guess at something maybe they could get? I mean, access is great. If y'all have ever seen, how many of y'all have ever heard Mick Fleming with ACCE speak? And he does this presentation where he has a triangle, and he says, picture your community as a triangle, and you've got business on one side, government on the other, and then your citizens on the third slide. And a Chamber of Commerce is truly the only organization in a community that can touch all three of those audiences and pull them together. There's not, unless you can think of another one that would be out there that could do that. So you could probably say that's a benefit or something you can get, that you're not going to get anywhere else. Any affinity programs you guys are doing that you can't get somewhere else? I mean, we're looking at and you have to be careful because you don't want to do an affinity program that perhaps is going to compete with a group of members, maybe that does something. I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't know if it's easier if you're like the National Medical Association or the Home Builders Association. It might be easier to do that. But I think that that's something that we're going to have to get better at and try to figure out what that is. A lot of it's because there's just so much choice and competition out there. This next piece, she gave us an example of 3 different types of organizations. So I'm going to tell you what they are, and I want you to try to figure out where you fit. Or if you fit, you may not even be one of these. The first type is called the Scrooge Association, and that's the association where they make you pay your dues, and they make you pay for everything. They nickel and dime you to death throughout the whole year, which traditionally chambers of commerce have kind of been that way. We're going to charge you. It depends on where you are. I say that, but not everybody has. Maybe we've morphed into that. We're going to charge you for everything. There's the Skim Milk Association, which these groups rely on programs or events to generate revenue. They're skimpy on benefits and services like the affinity programs or the other types of programs, and maybe they do one big event a year and they use that as their event, we're going to leverage that. That's our collateral for the whole year to get you to stay as a member. And then there's the Antique Associations. These are the ones that have been around many years. And but because it's aging, they haven't changed. Therefore, they're not staying relevant. Does anybody? I'm not going to tell you to say which one you may or may not be. Does anybody see yourself in maybe one or more of these? You do. Well, then maybe you should not. You should think about that, right? Okay, go ahead and go to the next page. This one's all about data, and we're going to. I'm going to give you a handout in just a little bit. Let you look at that. But how many of y'all do annual surveys? Ooh, raise your hand if you don't do an annual survey, but you'd like to, because there's lots of resources in this room, and you could get something from everybody. How many of you do legislative surveys? Do you do surveys after your events? Do you do exit interviews for your members? Do you do them in person, or do you do hard copy? Or do you do both? So it's a hard copy. Do you call them and walk them through it ever? Okay. How many of you just do focus groups throughout the year? Just for kicks and giggles, we're going to get some people together and we're going to ask some tough questions. What's going on in your industry? What are you seeing as benchmarks? Do you do that? Do you guys do that? Anybody? What other kinds of surveys have we done that I didn't mention?
When we've done a survey, though, the response is terrible.
Really?
Exactly what I was going to say. I wanted to
So now when you say response is terrible, what's the percentage? Because our survey is typically on the big membership survey. It's 1 year it was 33%, which I thought was fantastic. Then the next year it was like 25%, which is still pretty good. The national average is 3 to 7%.
That's what I was.
So you're at the national average. So do you offer drawings? Do you bribe them? Do you say, we just sent out our legislative survey this week, and if you complete the survey, your name is entered and you get 2 tickets to the annual dinner. Little things like that. Would love it if we could give iPods away. Or
The Georgia Chamber just did one, and you get entered for AirTran tickets.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. How many? Fred Boscarino had a program he introduced a couple of years ago called the 12 at 12. Anybody done that? Have you had pretty good success with that?
It
Yeah.
We tried it.
Okay. 12 at 12 is you target members who are up for renewal in the next quarter. And then you try to get 12 people to come in and sit down and have lunch at noon with your chamber president or your board chair or someone like that. And you just have a strategic conversation around the table where you talk about, what are their needs, what are issues, what do they need from the chamber. It's just listening, basically. Is that about how y'all did it?
We directed it towards, we started with the retail community.
Okay, so you had,
Bringing people in, not necessarily
Okay.
based on their,
when their
renewal,
dues, right.
but
Mm.
based on industry.
Okay.
You know, big box retailers and then,
Right. Right.
smaller retail.
We do annually what we call them our business roundtables, and we do, and it's been different ways. One year we might do them all in one day, and then we have a keynote, and then we break out and go to little sessions. But typically, what we do is we break it out either every month or every 2 months or something. We'll do retail, and then we'll do hospitality, and then we'll do manufacturing and education, nonprofits, all that sort of stuff. Something interesting that we heard recently in one of our sessions is they don't want us to wait and just do it once a year. They would prefer that we do it twice a year for each sector because there's things that are shifting and changing between that 6-month cycle. And we always learn things. We see trends, yes.
Do you invite just members, or do you invite non-members if you're targeting them?
Did you invite some non-members? Yeah, we try to invite non-members. Yeah, and I've been told we have a gentleman who recently passed away in our community that was a behavioral scientist, that when you do a focus group, you don't want to mix your purposes. You want to do the first group to find out where the hurt is, where are their needs, where are they feeling the pain. But you don't use that group to find solutions. But that you come back with a different group based on what you've collected, from several groups on where the pain is. You come back with another group, and that's your solution finding group. So if you're not trying some of this stuff, I would recommend it's a great feedback. But the thing about it is, if you're going to do it, you need to be consistent with the questions that you asked, so that when you're done with the process, you have some baseline data, but you're also able to start to see some trends and some patterns. And the only way to really do that is if you ask consistently the same questions. We have a whole packet.
It'd be a good thing,
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking, kind of when you're face-to-face talking to people, and your real estate people, maybe every February you have yourself, call it 12 or whatever, and it could be 12 or maybe 6. But
Right.
real estate people come together, and that's local industry.
Oh, absolutely,
That
yes.
would be something, when you're face-to-face, if you had your calendar of different months for different needs.
Absolutely. That's a great way to structure it. And I remember what I was going to say a moment ago. Dr. Harless, the gentleman that passed away, has always told us that the perfect size roundtable or focus group is 5 to 6 people. We always think we have to have 10 or 12 or 15, but it's really, you get more meaningful conversation when you have that smaller group. Maybe it means you have to do a little, more of them or more frequently. But I love what you're suggesting, Missy, because it's structuring it.
Conversation to go face-to-face, when you're talking to people, you have your calendar sort of month, and you go now, that will keep them,
Yes. Uh-huh. Mhm.
and every person you meet, tell them.
Yeah. We have a packet, if anybody's interested in it, that Carol Ann can send you, that we've developed a few years back. That's it's a template for scribes. It's a template for the questions to ask.
Yeah, the questions
Um,
the scribe, the facilitator.
Right. Oh, yeah. Tip sheet for the facilitator. If you're interested in any of that, we just pull it out every year and look at it. And if we have to get scribes or different facilitators, we give them a little tip sheet. And because there is an art to being a facilitator, you're not engaging in the conversation. You're moving it along and pulling information out of folks. So the main purpose of this slide, we'll get back on track here, is first of all, you got to find out what your members want. You got to understand them. You can't always just do it through a paper survey. You've got to have a varied approach with a variety of tools in there. And then once you find out where they hurt or what their needs are or what the problem they have, the next thing is you want to find a solution. So the bottom line is figure out where they're hurting or what their needs are, and then solve the problem. And if you can do that, you can deliver a great experience along with that, the solving the problem, deliver the experience, then the chances of retaining that member are much higher. So that sounds so simple. Find out what their problem is, create a solution, and deliver a great experience. And I know it says 2 things on there, but really it's 3 things that make the difference. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This next section to her presentation, she talked a lot about, again, it's creating the data. It's what are the top 3 challenges, what are the needs, the barriers. A lot of times when we do our focus groups, we talk about what are you seeing in your industry as trends, and then we'll ask, what are some things that are negatively impacting your industry or positively impacting your industry? And then that takes them into a deeper level of conversation where it changes kind of how they think a little bit. Sometimes you still have to ask leading questions, though, because Glenn asked a great question. I forget, we were with the Main Street folks recently, and what was that question you asked at the end? It was about funding.
Oh, we had not heard a single thing from anyone about a problem with getting funding for their business, and yet we hear from all the national surveys that the number 1 issue for small business is funding.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, am I going to understand that problem's gone?
And that opened up a whole nother conversation because like they said, well, we've never thought about the chamber in terms of funding. We just don't think about you like that. Well, there are things chambers can do to create access to funding for small businesses. That they just weren't, did somebody?
Well, I was going to say,
Oh,
the big eye opener for us is that people don't think of us in certain realms where they have problems, and if we're the business experts, if we're the home of business, then they should be thinking of us as those solutions. And what are we not doing to make them think in those terms?
Right. And once you find out where their problems are and where their hurts are, then that changes the whole scope of how you plan. Because then you're going to say, okay, maybe some of the stuff we're doing, although we like it, isn't really a fit. If you took your whole chamber database and you could do a spreadsheet on every single member and you could sort them by the top 3 problems that they've shared in a one-on-one conversation, and maybe those top 3 problems that popped up had nothing to do with an event or networking or anything like that, then you could go back and say, well, then we've got to create other types of benefits to create the value for them. Because the more you can help them solve that problem, check that off the list, then you've created value. And what you've also created is loyalty and the chance for a higher retention rate. Let's see. She talked a lot about exclusivity and inclusivity and how that's a factor for multi-generations, but to look closely at your board. And I know if you've ever gone through accreditation or any process like that, there is a section in there. How many of y'all have gone through the accreditation and you're shaking your head over there, where they ask you, is your board a reflection of the demographic breakdown of your membership? And is your membership a reflection of the demographic breakdown of your community? So how many of you could answer that question just off the top of your head today? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Yes. I can, okay. Then that's probably an exercise you should go back and do with your organization. Just simple things. If you just know what the demographic breakdown is of your community, it wouldn't be that hard to figure out how that matches up with your chamber. But when you look at the chamber board, and we'll just use the generational piece as a factor, how many young 40 or unders do you have on your board? And I'll tell you right now, I don't think we have any on our board anymore. It's because they've aged over the last 4 or 5 years. We used to have a good number of mid to upper 30s, but now they've all bumped over the 40. And I don't think we've had some that are chairing a couple of things, like our Leadership CAWITA program and our YP program. But how many of you would say a third of your board is under 40? So you guys are on the cutting edge. 3 that are younger than you. What do you attribute that to? Have you consciously gone out and said, we absolutely have to have? You want to tell us about your experience?
Well, it was happened prior, before I came to our president. That is always, what she keeps in the back of her mind is to represent our community in the different. We do more of sectors like education and finance.
Right.
And actually, our chairman is 38-ish.
Okay.
So he definitely keeps
Gina, was yours a conscious effort?
Yes.
Okay.
It was, if we don't get that age group engaged, we will no longer.
Right. Yeah.
So we've got to get them involved so that we can find out what their needs are, attack that generation.
Okay. Yes.
I was gonna add to that, I actually serve as the chair for Young Professional Leaders for the United Way.
Mhm.
So I went to my president and said, we need a junior board of directors where they're all under 40.
Mhm.
And they can get mentored by our current board, who of course are over their 40s.
That's actually one of the strategies. Sarah did not mention it, and I don't. Was it in the book? Do you remember it being in the book? It's in one of her white papers that I downloaded, where she talks about doing junior chambers of commerce or junior. I forget what the other type of group that she recommended. And and I have to admit, with our organization, we have we break it down by industry sector, size of business, race, and gender, but we've not done it by age. And that's something that we will probably go back and reevaluate, and probably all of us need to do that. Have y'all done that, Crystal?
And that was one, I did exactly the same. We have it all broken down by ages.
Yeah.
Not a part of it. And the funny thing is our new people are some of the younger people, but they're still not even close to the
Yeah, yeah. Caroline, let's go to the next slide. And this is, now we're going to transition a little bit into some of the generational issues. And you can read what it says up there. We've already talked about it. By 2015, Gen Y will be the majority of the workforce, largest shift in the workforce in our work history. And we are, 2 years away from that? So, there's lots we can do to begin to prepare for that. This next slide gives you a little bit of breakdown. And I had y'all stand up again. So, 1965 is the beginning of Gen X. I was actually born January 9th. So I tell people, I got 1 foot in the baby boomers and a half of a heel over here in the Gen Xers. But it's interesting, you don't see the Gen X's in the middle. That's why I say we're the forgotten generation, because we're the smallest generation of the 3. 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day for the next 15 years. Let me give you a little bit of information about each section. Okay, boomers were raised to follow and value a certain path that everyone followed with loyalty and commitment. That's where you saw people working for the same companies for like 30 years, 40 years. Boomers like prestige. They value the hierarchy system. They're very optimistic, very structured, and they're conformists. Would that describe a lot of the boomers in the room today? Are you an Xer or a Y? You're a Y, okay. Gen X was the MTV generation. How many remember the very first host of MTV? Wasn't it Edie Tarbox? Does anybody remember that? We were telling our age. Yeah. Generation X is the most debt-ridden generation. They are squeezed between the children that are coming back home and caring for aging relatives. Do y'all see a lot of that? And they are time poor. They are the generation that is most moved from conformity to individuality. And the reference back to the Beatles, what they looked like when they first came out, and then 3 years later, they looked like a totally different group. Many of the Generation Xers were raised in single-parent households, and therefore they became very self-sufficient. They're the first generation of latchkey kids, and they are a product of hands-off parenting. And the reason why that's so important is when you get to the Gen Y, you'll see that it's the exact opposite. Trust is not given. They only trust they do trust their peers. They fend for themselves. They don't like to be micromanaged. They want to make their choices. They're fiercely independent, a bit rebellious. They had a rocky transition from college to career because it was during an era when there were a lot of layoffs in corporate America. That's the generation that's seen the most impact for downsizing, restructuring, corporate, mergers, all the things that happened in the workforce. Right. They're constantly seeking professional development opportunities. They always want to expand their skills, their resume, and stay marketable. And she said that's an opportunity for companies and for organizations like us, because that's a niche that we could fill with that generation. They've seen the nation's leaders fail to keep their promises more than any other generation. And they need more communication, freedom. They need job descriptions. They need causes to get behind, but they need specific tasks and deadlines. So that's your Gen X. Okay, your Gen Y. That's the YouTube generation. That makes sense, though, doesn't it? They are generally liberal and they're very driven. This is the generation that's the instant gratification. They don't have a lot of interpersonal skills. They're highly entrepreneurial. They've seen a lot of violence. If you think about over the last, 20 years, I guess. They have gone from hands-off parenting to extreme hands-on parenting. Are y'all seeing a lot of that with the Gen Y? It's a difference in a value, I guess, or maybe it's how their life is structured. They have been the most protected, supervised, and provided for than any other generation. That's where you see it's all about me, or the interpretation of my entitlement. They were raised as an equal in the household, therefore they have no concept of hierarchy. They've always been an equal with the adults in their household, and they want that in the workplace as well. They're considered the trophy generation, and this was very interesting. Everybody in this particular generation has been rewarded for just being a part of the team. Think about it. You get a certificate because you participated, not so much that you came in first, second, or third place. They will show up to the workplace with the "here I am, what do I get" mentality. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's totally a different shift from the baby boomers. They want recognition and they want lots of it. And I think that comes from everybody being recognized for everything. So use your newsletter, award ceremonies, member of the month, parking. They love contests. Use all of these as forms to generate recognition. And remember I talked in the beginning, they ranked technology on the same level as air and freedom, which are pretty darn important. The young adult unemployment has been an all-time high. So they've seen more of that in their generation than any of the other generations have. So what can we do to help them? We can help them build relationships. And we can help them build relationships using technologies. We just got to be savvy in how we do that. Social media, texting, on-demand programming, 24/7 accessibility. That's something we've been talking about is we want some of our services to be available 24/7 through technology. And how can we do that and what does that look like? Feature more young people in the videos that we do, in the pictures that we take, in the testimonials that we use. Now, who follows the Gen Ys? Be the Gen Z. Nobody really talks about the Gen Zs, and that's mainly because they haven't really they're not of age yet. They're like up to 16 years old, 16 and under. They are more technologically savvy. They're more demanding of what's in it for me. And keep in mind, this will be the next wave that hits the workforce. A study on children 2 years to 6 years a study on children shows that children 2 years to 6 years make most of the household purchases, or they influence most of the household purchases. Exactly. Yeah. So let's see if there was anything that this was very interesting. She got into a whole section on in the workforce, and the one that I found really interesting is the 82% of employees, when the recession is over, 82% of the workforce is expected to shift jobs. That's huge. That's a huge impact. And it's not just us in our organizations, but on our members. Look at what's going to happen. And that 20 months is the average time that people under 35 will spend on a job. Of course, that's, think of the cost factor with recruiting and training and all that goes into it. If they're only going to be there for 20 months, what happens next? And this is interesting, and this is a reflection, I think, of just how corporate America maybe hasn't shifted quite as much as they need to. 40% of companies are unsuccessful at collaboration, which, of course, hinders all the important things like productivity and succession planning. Okay, go ahead and go to the next. And this, again, this is in the future generations. There's just more technology and skepticism, more frustration, more time preservation. You basically have, when you sign up a new member, 60 days to prove yourself. That's your window. So when you're thinking about what are my strategies going to be and how am I going to build my program, you need a 60-day program, don't you? How am I going to inundate you in 60 days? How am I going to love on you in 60 days? How am I going to make you feel appreciated and show you the value and give you the return on the investment in 60 days? We're going to be best friends by the end of 60 days. So I would think about that as you're putting your program together. On that next slide, one of the things she talked about is the younger generation when they choose to find a new employer and engage with a new employer. What are they looking for? Ethics and values are very important, and they're looking at what's the mission of the organization. They're looking at how are you creatively structuring pay, and how can you, maybe you can only afford to pay me a certain amount for a base, but what can you do for me beyond that? They all want a challenge, and what interesting, and in a moment we're going to talk about career development because I thought this was an interesting movement, I guess. They want to be leaders in the organization, and a lot of them want to start in your job without, having worked their way up. So one of the things she talked about is you've got to structure something where they can see, a clear path for how can I get to where, but how can I do it in half the time it took you to get there? Because remember, this is instant gratification. Same thing applies with your board. How many of your YPs immediately want to start out as your board chair? How do I become board chair? Well, and so if you have that on your radar screen, and before the question gets asked, you can actually address it, in your talking points and when you're out visiting or whatever, that we have some opportunities. We're looking to bring some new board members on. There's a path but we've got the accelerated program if you're interested. And, if you'd come over here and we'll put you in this training program for a year, and then when you come out of that program here, you can automatically be a junior board member, or you can chair YP or leadership CAWITA or something like that, and then that gets you to maybe the board level in a quicker, faster pace than if you just sort of did it on your own. So if you had a way to strategically handpick some people where you could move them up the line, that would work. Okay, back to the career development. One of the things that Sarah said is there's two different types of employees that they're seeing in the workforce today. There's the mobile employers and there's the masters. And these are the two different career paths that they're taking. So the mobile career path people, they want to quickly learn a skill set, and then they want to move on and they want to learn another skill set. And then they want to learn another skill set because they want to do this and become, multi-talented before they get to wherever they're going. So as a chamber, what can we do to help people like that? Well, you think of all your leadership opportunities, things you can do to build your skill set. So maybe there's some strategic things we could be doing with our YP population. If you had a conversation and say, well, what are you wanting to learn and where do you want to end up in your career? And, how can we help you do that? Well, I want to become learn to be an event planner, and then I want to learn I want to learn what it takes to chair a committee. So again, it's more personal, it's one-on-one, it's understanding what their needs are and then customizing something that works for them. And then the second career path is the masters. And these are people who love to do one thing, and they really want to develop those skills exclusively. So they want a lot of experiences to go into helping them build that one thing. So again, it's, thinking creatively on how you can tap into some of those folks. Now, what makes them want to stay with an employer? If you want to go to the next slide. Oh, it's already up there. And these are the things that she listed. Everything from, positive relationships to back to ethical organizations, feeling like they can trust, a sense of belonging. If they don't get any of this, or if these things are missing, then there is no loyalty and there are no qualms about leaving. They're going to leave you in a heartbeat. And you have to go back and remember, well, what did it cost you to recruit them? Or what did it cost your members to recruit them? What did it cost to train them? What's it costing you to train your employees? So, how can you go back to your environment, an environment that includes all of these things so that you have a workforce that is willing to stay with you longer than that. What was it, 20 months? Is that what it said earlier? Okay. And y'all might have to help me with this Best Buy example, but there was a group of employees that had some ideas from a cost-cutting perspective to streamline some things. They took it to senior management, who sort of brushed them off, so didn't take them seriously. So they went back and they started their own test groups independent without senior management knowing about this, because they had some data where they said it was HR, right, and they said we can prove that, do you remember what it was? So whatever it was that would work that would affect the company.
More cost-effective for the company.
Right. So they went and independently did their own little focus groups and came up with the results. And they were told not to do this, but they did it anyway. And so then they came back a year later and they came armed with the results and the data. And what ended up happening then, the senior management said, this is great, you guys have done a fantastic job, and they implemented all the recommendations.
To do with the telecommuting. I think
Was that,
part of
that's exactly what it
Had to
was.
do with scheduling.
Scheduling.
Right, and the hours that you had to work. And when you
Okay,
had to work.
okay.
And it seemed to me it had some telecommuting involved with it as well, but they have blocks of time when
Right.
they book, from 9 to 3 or from 3 to 9. What they did was they mixed it up and they said, I only work from 12 to 6, and they moved it around and things like that and made it much more flexible in their scheduling.
And it was more people friendly, employee friendly, and so they were able to prove their point. And so then management said, "Okay, you've got the data to back it up, then we'll go ahead and take your suggestions." Loved this next one, and I forget the name of the company, but it was a very large company somewhere on the West Coast that has redone their employee benefits, and they now have what's called unlimited vacation. It's based on the honor system. And they said they've had it a couple of years, and that so far nobody's taken advantage of it because your coworkers kind of hold you accountable. But it was a wonderful benefit. It was a great, not necessarily just a sales tool, but it just created that culture of the work-life balance. And so we've actually talked about that amongst ourselves. And then, again, the opportunity to lead, collaborate, fast-track more salary. The more you can streamline it and show them a path, then the more needs that you're going to meet. And then fun. Less structure. I don't know how a lot of your organizations are structured, but I know that I could never go back to an environment where I'm required to sit at my desk 9 to 5 every day. And I think we are blessed. Over the last 7 years, we've created an environment in our chamber where I mentioned none of us have offices. There are 2 people that have to be there every day by nature of what they do because they greet the public and answer the phones and all of that. But we have a very entrepreneurial environment, and it's very much a virtual environment. But I will tell you this, because of the structure behind it, in order to make it work, our results are off the chart. The things that we've been able to accomplish the last few years are significantly higher than what it was in previous years. But it was a mental thing and a psychological thing. It created a more I go back to the life-work balance. You have more control of your schedule. You're not tied to the structure of being in that one chair. It doesn't matter where you do your work. It's the quality of the work that you get done, right? And how you do the work. So we freed up ourselves from those constraints. And we work 60, 80 hours a week, but it's a much more pleasant work environment because you're controlling. And it was hard for some of our older volunteers, the baby boomers, that were used to coming into the chamber, maybe specifically seeing me sitting behind that desk. And then all of a sudden, it was about a 2-year training period where you're not going to see me sitting behind that desk. And chances of you seeing me here are not real good, unless I'm having a meeting or something like that. Once you get your people trained and in that mode, then it changes their outlook. And I think we've begun to see other companies start doing some of the same things as well. So I would encourage you to think about that. This was a startling statistic that she shared with us, and I hope that you can all see that. This was employee engagement across the board in our country. 26% of the workers today are actually engaged. They enjoy what they do, they like what they do, they're motivated when they get up, they're loyal, they're productive. 55% of today's workforce is just not engaged. They show up, they do their job because they have to work, they have to get a paycheck, but they're just putting in their time. And 19% of today's workforce is just miserable. They hate their job. They'd love to be anywhere but at their job. They're completely disengaged. Well, when you add up the 19 and the 55, what is that, 74% of our workforce today is just not engaged. That's huge. That's depressing, isn't it? How many of you are in the 26%? Well, I probably shouldn't even ask you. How many of y'all are in the 19%? But if you know that, And I don't know how much you can impact that with your members, but you can impact that in your own chambers, in your own organizations, because of the culture that you create and the environment that you create for your employees and the structure and how you go about managing the day-to-day. This next section is on communication, and it's really about using all the tools at your fingertip and how you engage all of your different members and different audiences. And, if you know that your workforce is primarily going to be Gen Y in the 2015 timeframe, and you know that technology is rated with air and freedom, then you know that technology has got to be a huge piece of what you plan and how you deliver all of your programs. So the basic stuff, just the electronic communication, but beyond that, looking at creatively how I love the fact that you're a baby boomer with your iPad. There's more of that we have to have. There's more of how many of y'all are doing texting to your members? Because there's some great programs. Yeah, we just started that. Are you doing that?
We're not doing it. We're
Yeah.
receiving texts more now that people are texting what used to be an email.
Well, texting is replacing, from a communication standpoint, in many ways, the emails. And one of the, I don't remember what the statistic was, but everybody reads their text. They're constantly reading those texts. Emails sometimes get read or don't get read. We started ours a couple of months ago, and we're committed just to doing 2 to 3 a month because you don't want to inundate them and you want to make it the right message. I don't know how many members are signed up for texting now.
It's over 100.
It's over 100. I mean, you have to get their permission to use their cell phone, and so it's a bit of a tedious task. But it's, again, you're not going to communicate 100% in one way with everybody. So if you can do it a variety of ways, some people are going to do the Facebook thing. Some people are going to respond to the texting. Some people are going to respond to both. Some people are going to do that. And don't forget U.S. mail. I mean, that's a big shift that folks are seeing, is that because emails go into spam or into the junk mailbox or whatever, or people are just deleting, that we've got to still factor in a little bit of the old-fashioned, like, postcard campaigns. We're talking next year of doing, like, maybe a postcard at the beginning of each quarter with a reminder of here's your key events for the quarter, because they're not seeing them on the email a lot of times. So it's really get your YP group involved in figuring out what are the new ways that we can communicate. And again, don't forget you've got that 60-day window. So you want to figure out with your new people, how do they want to be communicated with, so that in that first 60 days you're communicating with them in the way they want to be communicated with. Let's see if there was anything in that section. Video. How many of y'all are using video, or you have a YouTube account, or you're uploading? Okay. If you're not doing that, I would highly recommend it. It's not hard to do at all. It's very easy to set up a YouTube account, and then you can just use your little flip camera. It doesn't have to be something fancy that you... In fact, Kimberly, I looked at one of your Douglas County videos the other day that had Kay Pippen's son, Andy. Do you remember that one? Was one of your breakfasts or lunches or whatever? But then I got interested, and so I started watching it some more. And so I would highly recommend, if you're not doing the YouTube, absolutely do that one as well. Because remember, 2 of your bigger audiences are the MT generation and the YouTube generation. So they grew up with that. They haven't known anything different. So it's not even a delight anymore. Have y'all ever seen that example where you have like a circle on the outside, and that's like, it's considered a delight, and then you go in and then it's considered an aha, and then you go to the middle circle and it's a core expectation. And it, like used to when you'd go to like a hotel and they would give you a coffee maker in the room, that was a delight. And now it's like it's a core expectation. Or you'd have, even in some hotels, the chocolate on the pillow in many ways is still an aha, or maybe it's the aha and then the delight and then the core. So you got to be careful what you create, because it will become a core expectation, so you want to be able to sustain it. So you probably need to look and see, well, what kind of what delights am I providing right now, or ahas, and what maybe you can survey some of your folks and say, what are the core expectations? The texting, in another year or so could be a core expectation. So if you're not doing that, then your relevancy is going to be less than what you want it to be. Okay. This is a little bit of what we've just talked about. So we'll go to the next slide. And there's a handout I have on this one. Let's see. Oh, by the way, I'm going to pass this around. This is very interesting. How many of you would say that advocacy is one of your key benefits that you provide? I would say for us, when you read this survey that was done just this year, it basically, I'll give you just a quickie little preview. And you can also go down and download this for free at Sarah's website. 82%, and keep in mind this was associations, so not just chambers, of associations promote advocacy as a primary membership benefit. So we're not off target in the fact that we promote advocacy, right? However, 84% of associations find it challenging to motivate members to get involved in advocacy. And when we do our membership survey, they'll tell us advocacy is one of the most important things. But then when you try to get them engaged in the process, they don't have the time, they don't want to be bothered. 42% of associations gauge the level of interest in advocacy among young members as fair. And 25% of associations do not post any advocacy information on social networks. And I think it's because they don't think to do it. So the challenge here is, how do you get, again, that younger generation involved in issues? Are you doing it through the channels and the tools where they're used to communicating? And if you'll think about it, the Gen Y is the instant gratification generation, right? Well, most advocacy issues are very slow or glacial-like in their movement. And so if they're not going to see some instant change or instant fix or whatever, then you're going to lose their interest. So these kind of go hand in hand, but they're a little different. I'll start it out like this, and y'all can read about that. And you can also go to her website and download that. This slide right there, here, though, it's really talking about you got to use the technology. You've got to give them a reason to belong. Go back to your niche piece. And then customizing your programs. We talked about the data piece, and then taking that data once you learn, and you can sort your membership, and you know kind of where their needs are and what their interests are. And then you divide that and create programs targeted to that. And then the globalization. I don't know if you're talking about that with your members, but what are their connections to the international world, and how is that affecting what you're doing at the local level? What are some causes maybe they have? So you might want to think about that. And then, this was very interesting. These are some new membership models that are out there. Customize and pay accordingly, or pay as you go. Lots of free membership models out there. I don't know how we would make that work. Most of us are familiar with tiered dues. How many of y'all have either tiered dues or a variety or a version of tiered dues? I know you've done an overhaul, total tiered dues. I know, like Kimberly at Douglas, y'all have your Chairman's Club, which is a version of tiered dues. We have Enhanced Investors. Does Macon have like a version of tiered dues? I'm sure all of you know, really? Okay. Yeah, well, there's some great resources out there. There's some great resources in the room today. The tiered dues is back in the beginning we talked about, they want to customize things that fit their needs. They want to do the a la carte. So if you're not doing a version of tiered dues, even if it doesn't apply to all of your members, I would look maybe to start doing that. Online membership, has anybody been to mainstreetchamber.com? I know you have. And there's a chamber.com out there, isn't there? People can access some of the services we provide by doing it all virtually. Go ahead.
I just want to tell you, if you're not aware of this one, on Facebook, there's a group called the Georgia Commerce Club. They started 2 years ago. I think now they have somewhere upwards of 4,000 members. They're offering the Office Depot program.
Really?
They're doing exactly what we do, free.
I'm going to pass some of these articles around. If you're not, I would go check them out. And that's where it gets back into, we talked about niche and value, and what can you provide, the exclusive benefit that nobody else is providing. That's where it gets difficult. I think one of the things nobody else online can do is the sense of community that we create with our members and within our own, with our own organization. And the more you can do to bring that community together and create collaboration opportunities. And then, of course, if you can show, like with advocacy issues, there's a direct bottom line benefit. It's harder to do, but if you can say, for instance, I'll give us as an example, and we haven't calculated the benefit, but we got behind a whole reinvention of our healthcare community with the replacement hospital that we had, and then the new cancer treatment center hospital, and hopefully the new rehab hospital that will be built. Well, we can actually translate the time that we spent and the advocacy efforts that we invested into, how many jobs it created, and then how many, what the residual effect would be just in dollars that it creates in the community. So if you can take an issue and you can work it through some of that, and then you can clearly come back and show your member, this is what it made a difference. Most people, non-members, are going to benefit from our advocacy efforts, whether they're a member or not. I mean, that's just a reality. So I don't know how you get around that one, but what I always say is the larger our numbers as a chamber, the bigger our voice. And the bigger our voice, then the more impact that we can have. Not everybody's going to buy into that, or will they care about that. But again, these are just food for thought, things to be thinking about. The next slide. Oh, we have a little, are you passing them out? Okay. This is a handout for you to take back with you to help you kind of think through some of the stuff that we've talked about today and put some meat to your plan. So I don't know how many of y'all actually have like a membership plan, or you probably all have variations of a membership plan. But this handout that I'm passing out basically will take you through a thought process of defining your purpose. What are your goals? What are the strategies? What are your challenges, your 1-year goals, your 90-day plan, and what might you do for the next 7 days? And when we went to this workshop, I think one of the strategies I wrote down for the next 7 days, which I haven't done, was that we would actually look at some of the strategic stuff in Sarah's information and use it to come up with like 3 really good, relevant questions to ask our members. We've done bits and pieces of it, but probably not that specific. But this is for you to take and for you to use to kind of think through what we've talked about today. And this was Sarah's plan that she gave us. Great questions. When you develop this plan, it's a wonderful way to get you started, to give you a way to measure what you're doing, but more than anything, it helps you stay focused. And we all have our business plans that the organization has, the strategic plans, all those kinds of things, but we maybe don't take it, dig down a little and specifically create a membership development or growth plan. And I don't know if y'all did some of that in your overhaul with what you were doing with the tier dues. You probably did do some of that. But it's some great just creating awareness types of questions that are listed in here. So I would encourage you to take this and try to work through a little bit of this and just see maybe if you can't create some structure moving forward. One of the things I thought was interesting about meaningful goals in 5 years, she suggested quadruple your membership. Who was it that's grown by 100 this past year? So maybe double your membership in the next 5 years is a big audacious goal for you guys. Be the leader in the state, or be the best in the state at how you engage your younger population. So all of you guys that are already pushing to have the younger population on your board and in some leadership roles, you're ahead of the curve. So maybe you become the model for the state and how that's done. I loved this one, 50% of membership under 40, where you target and you really, find those folks and get them engaged. So I'm going to fall in your lap over there. So that gives you some idea about that. So does anybody have any questions about this? Would this help you kind of organize your thought process and think through some things? Okay, I'm going to pass around these other articles, and I've just highlighted some interesting things. This one's about members won't tell you, but your data will. And this is all about collecting the data. And this is a wonderful little anecdote about this person who's a Gen Y that joined an association for how you research family history. And it was like the time that they scheduled the meeting and how they structured. None of that was a fit for her, but she really wanted to be a part of the group, but they weren't asking her. So I'm going to start on this side. And then this one is really good information just about how you communicate and customize your message. And that very last slide In closing, it comes from an article that I'm going to pass around in just a moment, where it talks about, and there are things you kind of need to remember just as you sum up your whole program, that whether it's young or old, membership recruitment is a sales process, and you need to understand the life cycle of your members in order to retain them. And it talks a little bit about there's some things you can do to seal the deal. I'll let you read about that. You want to understand your niche. We've talked about that. Go back to if you had to clean the slate and you could only keep one benefit for your chamber, what would that be? The best thing that you're best at that brings the most value to your members. And remember, you can't be all things to all people. So you have to narrow that down and figure out where your greatest benefit is. And then research your members' needs, data. You got to have the data. You got to ask the questions, because if you don't seek to understand, you'll never be able to create and customize the programs that are going to help create the solution that you've identified with their needs. And then know your association's value. And we all know this, if you don't toot your own horn, nobody else will. And so you have to know what your value is so that you can talk about that. And test, track, and repeat. That goes back to the data again. I can't say enough about understanding who your members are, what categories they fit into. I loved some of these things. You know how in Chamber Master you can track website traffic, social media engagement, click-through rates to e-newsletters or constant contact, things like that. Those are all the things that you should be looking at. We've started looking at some of ours. We looked recently at attendance at our early bird forum in the last 3 years and tried to do some comparisons. You know, you always at least need to have the conversation about getting rid of things and or changing them dramatically. And then at the end of this article, they talked about making it a no-brainer for members to renew. So I'm going to pass this around. You've already, here you go. And I think that's it. The only other one I had was about culture, and I'll start that on this side. And that's it. That's basically the book in a nutshell. I would definitely encourage you to read it because there's much more in the book than what was presented at the session or what we shared and talked about today. And read that other book, Race for Relevancy. The End of Memberships as We Know It and Race for Relevancy are the two big books in the industry right now. But, you know, it's funny because this is not an easy job that we have. I think being in the chamber world is probably the hardest job on the face of the earth because you're not just having to be strategic and you're not having to be creative and you're not having to implement all these programs. You're having to be interpersonal. I mean, there's just so many facets. So I applaud every one of you with what you do. And you're new. So how long have you been on the job now? Since April. Okay. Well, welcome. I had not met you yet, and I have a lot of respect for Kay and everything that you guys do over there. It gets in your blood, but it's easy to get discouraged because we're so overwhelmed and we have so many things that we have to be good at and that we have to do. So I think the one takeaway maybe from this is carefully choose and pick wisely where you spend your time. Make it count. But more than anything, the most important thing is understand your members, understand what they represent, and kudos to everybody who's doing all the personal face-to-face stuff because that's time-consuming but probably will give you the greatest return when it's all said and done. You're welcome.